Hi, in this MuseumIndex Plus video we're going to look at workflow, which is a new way of performing data entry and other tasks where the actual steps of the process of the procedure are guided. There's a predefined procedure, so all the different types of procedure that you can have within MuseumIndex, all the standard spectrum procedures and procedures of your own, can be defined as a workflow, which gives you a series of steps that can guide the experienced user or indeed a volunteer through the process of running a loan or an acquisition or any of these things. So what we'll do, we'll start off, we're going to start a new procedure, and I'm going to use what I'll let you do is use an acquisition procedure that was developed by the Victoria and Albert Museum. This was developed in-house, so I want to use this to illustrate, although MuseumIndex Plus ships with procedures of its own, standard spectrum procedures, you're free to modify those procedures to add to the steps, to delete some of the steps, or to develop your own new workflows. So I've logged in as a curator in this instance. And what I'm seeing over here are the steps that I'm allowed to do currently as a curator. Typically a user will work through these steps sequentially, I suspect, but that you're not obliged to do that. Many procedures, something like planning an exhibition, which might take several months from beginning to end of that procedure. Many of those steps perhaps will not be done in order. You might photograph the objects before you've agreed terms and conditions, so the procedure allows you to pick any of these steps, and there are dependencies to stop you do things out of order. So step one is a basic data entry step. Each step in a procedure has a different type. We'll see some of the different types as we work through this. This is a data entry step, so there's a message which you can change the text of this, and step one is basically to define the responsible department for this acquisition, the source that we're requiring the objects from. Let's just do a search for, let's find somebody to acquire my objects from. I'll acquire it from a person. Let's see if we've got. Let's acquire this object from, doesn't really matter who. Let's acquire it from Alec Turner. When you've completed a step, we'll give a registered file reference. When you've completed a step, you just hit the complete button, and as long as all the mandatory fields have been filled in and the validations are okay, then the workflow just moves you on to the next step. You can see over here at the same time it records who, this is the username I've logged in as, and the date, so who completed that step. Certain steps have milestones, so step one has a milestone associated with it of acquisition has commenced, and you can see that up here as well. That allows you to do management reports on procedures to see how many acquisitions have reached a certain key stage. There are other things to do with milestones as well. Certain milestones can be copied into the object records to mark those objects as being things like potential acquisitions. So we're moved on to step two now. Step two is a choice step, and it's a bit like data entry. I'm filling in the acquisition method field in the acquisition procedure, but the outcome of this choice will affect subsequent steps in the procedure. So you can have steps that are dependent on me choosing purchase, and other steps that are dependent on me choosing gift at this point. So we'll go with gift, complete that, move on to the next step. The next step is to create the object records that go with this acquisition. I can quit the procedure at any stage, so if I save and close this procedure now, then I can come back to this subsequently on another day, and if I just, in its simplest form, if I just edit the current record, then it'll just take me on to the next step that it wants me to do. So we'll do a few more. As I say, every step has a bit of message text associated with it that instructs the user what to do at this stage. You can author in hyperlinks to internal documents, documents on your intranet with further guidance. So this particular step, I need to add some items. We'll create a couple of objects. Sticking with my theme from data entry, I'm going to require a cup and saucer as two separate objects here. So first object is going to be a cup. I'll just give that a simple description. You can set up various things within steps. So in this particular instance, we've set up an automatic function to generate a provisional object number. Later on in this workflow, we'll get to assign real object numbers to these, my cup and saucer, assuming that the acquisition goes through. So we've got a cup, and then I'll just create one more object, which has its own provisional number, and this will be my saucer. I can step back and forwards through the objects that I've created, and then we complete that step and we're on to the next one. A lot of these steps will be choice steps to do with, whether I need to enter supplementary information. So if there's copyright, I'll need to deal with copyright. I'm going to say no and pick the simple answer for most of these to get through this fairly quickly. So we'll say that this is out of copyright or not applicable. This is an edit step, so I can now see the two objects that I've created down here, and what I'm being asked to do is fill in the condition code. Let's do the first one, and we'll say it's in good condition, measured to date by me. I can batch apply that, so I can apply that condition to all the objects. I've only got two, but it can save time when there are many. Let's complete that step. Then there's a series of, in this instance, we've got a series of edit steps to fill in additional information to do with the acquisition. All the normal, when you're doing editing steps within workflow, all the normal facilities still apply. So we've still got field help if there is any. There isn't any on this field. We've still got, the pop-up full text editing facilities and spell checking. So let's complete that step. Some steps like this are simply a message step. So where you're certifying that you've done things outside of the computer system, outside of the collection management system, perhaps you're certifying that you've received a signed document, or that you've put something in the post, then there's simply a message, and by hitting the complete button and the fact that the system is recording who completed this and when, you're certifying that you have done what it said in the message. So we'll go through a few more of these. There's no hazardous materials involved. The main proposed location, let's say we're going to put this in the main ceramics gallery. We need to add to evaluation for the objects here. Let's say that these things are worth £5 each. Again, we'll apply that, just value that today. Apply that to all items. We don't anticipate any additional costs. We've confirmed in writing. I'm whizzing through these because there are some more interesting steps coming up that I want to show you. No terms and conditions. Supporting comments required. Okay, this is another sort of step. So where we're at in this acquisition is we're about to pass the information on to the keeper of ceramics and get approval for the acquisition. So this lets me review the information that I've filled in so far, the information about the acquisition, the details of the source of the acquisition, and information about the objects and the acquisition itself. So we can just complete that. Now, this is quite a significant step. So each step can have roles associated with it that determine who's allowed to perform those steps. Now, in this instance, as a curator, I'm not allowed to actually approve the acquisition. So instead, what I have is an assign step where I can assign the task of approval to another user or a group of users within the institution. This drop-down list knows which users are allowed to perform the steps that I'm trying to assign here. So it gives me a list of the users that can perform that task. And what I'm going to do is assign the approval to the keeper of ceramics in this instance, and complete that step. Now at that point you can see what's happened is it's basically dropped me out of editing the workflow, and that's because as a curator what I can do to this point in this acquisition is finished. When I ran that assign step, and the last step that I did, which assigned the proposal to the keeper will have received an email at that point telling them they've been assigned a step in a procedure. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to minimize this for a second and start up another version of MuseumIndex, log in as keeper. So having received the email that I have a procedure step assigned, the keeper will log in. You can see I've signed in as keeper here, and you can see here that there's an indication on the home screen that they have a procedure assigned to them. So they just click on that, and they're back into the same workflow, and they're taken to the step that they've been assigned. So this acquisition proposal has been submitted to you for approval. There's the same set of information that the curator got to see prior to making the assign step. So the keeper of approval, completes that, and then has an option to approve the acquisition, to not approve it, or there are more complex options, but we'll just say that we approve the acquisition. And that's basically my job done as keeper of ceramics, and all I have to do is assign the task back to the curator that assigned it to me. And now what will happen, it's the same thing the curator saw, my role as keeper is finished, and I'm taken back out of workflow again. One thing to note here is that at that point, that particular step has basically locked all of the steps. You can see these little padlock icons, has locked all of the steps leading up to that point. And that can be important. So the approval to acquire these objects was made on the basis of the information that was entered. We don't want that information to change now that the acquisition has been approved. When the keeper assigned the procedure back to the curator will have received an email in the same way that the keeper did, and they'll log back into the system. And sure enough, on their home screen, they will see that the procedure has been assigned back to them. So they can click here and just continue. We now have an option to, this is a report step, which will actually run a report and print out some paperwork to go in the file. I can do a print preview so you just get to see what that looks like. It's a multi-page report, basically including all the information about the acquisition and the series of workflow steps that have been carried out up to this point. So I can print that out and then complete the step. This is another view step, so I need to fill in some external forms and sign those off. Now I'm into acquisition date. Let's just put today's date in. So at that point we've acquired the object, and we now move on to accessioning. I'll just run through that as well. So today's accession date. So that's a turn purchase. At this point, I mentioned earlier on that the objects I created had been assigned these provisional museum numbers. Now's my chance to give them real museum numbers. All I'm going to do is change the prefix to C for ceramics. I'll give these some unique museum number. 2, 3, 4. I'll give this one 5, 6. This is a photography step. In theory, this step could just prompt me to import an image directly off my hard disk. I illustrated how to do that in a previous video on image handling. At the Victor and Albert, there's a slightly more complex system of, there's a photography department involved, so this is just a message step to say that, the necessary communication has happened about photographing the object. We can say whether or not the objects have been physically marked. Let's say that they have. There's another report. This is going to go in the acquisition register, whether the information entered up to that point. I won't bother printing that one. And at that point, we're done. So when I complete that, the workflow is now completely finished. The final milestone status of the procedure is the acquisition has been completed. There's all the acquisition info I entered, as well as the complete description of the workflow that led us up to that point. And here are my two objects. And if I click on those, as we saw in the previous video on procedures, we've got our object records. We haven't done any cataloging yet, apart from valuation and credit line condition. We can upload images, and we now have a journal entry that those two are both tied to that acquisition record. And that's basically it. So that concludes this video on workflow. Thank you.